Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 2020 annual members meeting. Excuse me, the first one to be held online, and that means we're making history. So congratulations. Because of the pandemic, here we all are. I hope there are plenty of you joining us from home. So we started with that lovely piece of music called Pandemia, and it was composed by a 6-year-old boy called Apollo, who is a student at the Guildhall School of Music. And he dedicated this to the victims of the coronavirus and medical staff. And he said he wrote it in the hope that it would give energy to the tired medical staff and to the victims of COVID-19 who are fighting to survive it. So welcome everyone. This is what's going to be happening this evening. And in a moment, we'll have a video presentation by our guest speaker, Claire Murdoch, NHS England and Improvements Director of Mental Health, and the National Mental Health Director. I will then lead the formal element of the meeting and tell you about the changes to the governors and the board. Our Chief Executive Angela McNab will outline some of our achievements this year, and our Director of Nursing and Quality, Dean Howells, will tell you about the improvements that we've made to our standards of care. The summary of our accounts will be presented by our Financial Director, Dave Ragg, and we'll have a we'll have a report on the work of the governors by our lead governor, Professor Wendy Savage. And there will, of course, be time for questions at the end. So please don't forget that you can send your questions in at any time using the Q&A function, which you can open by clicking on the question mark icon next to the cog in the top right-hand side of your screen. If you don't want your name to be seen, you can do this anonymously, and this is to protect your privacy. So we're expecting a lot of questions and we'll answer them as many as we can at the end. And of course, if we can't answer your questions today, please don't worry about that. We'll put answers on the website. The meeting is held, of course, so that we can have the full annual report and a summary of it, as well as the governor's report, and details about the board are all on the website. You can see the address on screen. So that's the end of the housekeeping bit. So let's get on with the meeting itself. And as I say, we will start with a special video presentation by Claire Murdoch, NHS England and Improvements National Mental Health Director. Claire is also the Chief Executive of Central and North West London NHS Foundation Trust. So she's aware of some of the issues that we've been facing on a day-to-day basis. Claire couldn't be with us today, but she wanted to join with this very special message. And don't forget, please do, let's have your questions, particularly on what Claire has to say at the end of the meeting.
Hello, it gives me huge pleasure to be speaking at the Trust's AGM. Right across the country, mental health trusts have been undertaking vital and important work, both over recent years, but obviously especially during COVID. A reason that I'm particularly pleased to be speaking at this Trust's annual general meeting is that I've worked in mental health services and the NHS for some 37 years, and I think at least a decade of that was in Camden and Islington. So it's a place that's very, very special to me. I saw many of the services that the Trust offers today grow out of the closure of the old institution that was Free and Barnet up in North London. And I'm very proud of the progress that the organisation has made. So a huge privilege to be here. Just to remind people, though I'm sure you know, in this country we have a huge treatment gap in mental health services with big service pressures, And we are on a determined journey to close those treatment gaps, to make it easier for people to access help when they need it, to intervene earlier, to work with employers, schools, education, local communities, primary care, and so many others to try and change people's experience of coming forward for help, to abolish those waiting times which can do so much harm. I was asked about 4 years ago to take on the role as National Director for Mental Health, with a specific aim of, first of all, implementing with colleagues across the country and those at Camden and Islington, the 5-year forward view for mental health, which in the last 2 years has turned into the long-term plan for mental health. And that means that we need to be, as a country, seeing 2 million more patients a year every year by 2023. We have a hugely ambitious growth agenda with the investment to follow. And it's all of our jobs to make sure that the money reaches the front line and gets translated into the essential services that will have us seeing more than 2 million people a year additionally by 2023. Camden and Islington is a huge part of London's ability to deliver on its promise and its share of those 2 million. Just to remind you, the sorts of things that we will be doing are expanding our community mental health services, our CMHTs, looking at services for people with a personality disorder, eating disorders, major psychosis. We've really needed to see this investment in CMHTs flowing, and over the next 3 years it will. And Camden and Islington will be doing a great deal right now to look at how we innovate and transform in the CMHT space, particularly with primary care and the person and their family at the centre. The second thing we're really majoring on in the long-term plan is crisis services right across the country, all age crisis services. And I was delighted when during the pandemic we saw all parts of the country move to offer 24/7 crisis lines. That was all NHS trusts in the country. In a period of 5 weeks throughout April and May, we moved from half the country having those crisis lines in place to all. But better crisis services with alternatives to hospital, the ending of out-of-area placements, 24/7 crisis lines, another really important part of the long-term plan. The other really important part is to see children and young people's mental health services growing. And we want to, by 2023, see an additional 345,000 children and young people in mental health services across the country, whether that's in schools-based mental health support teams or in specialist young people's mental health services. So all of these are huge agenda of growth. Add to this more specialist services such as specialist perinatal services, homelessness services, gambling addiction services, and many others. What you can see is we have a very, very busy and challenged few years ahead of us. On top of that, of course, we're busily, all of us, and I know Camden and Islington have been very active in this area, we're busily challenging stigma and being part of changing society's attitude to mental health. So a busy agenda. And on top of all of that, of course, this year COVID came. None of us were expecting that a year ago. And we have had to adapt, adjust and step forward. We've seen lots of coverage of what's gone on in ICU and critical care, and I'm in awe of colleagues there. However, I know in my role as National Director that the mental health services, very much including this trust, stepped forward when they were called. We saw services continue to operate 24/7. We stood down very, very few services. We had to innovate in the digital space. So the terrific IAP services, talking therapist services that I know this trust runs, were able to really, after initial dips in referrals, continue to see patients on their caseloads, continue to offer counselling and stay in touch with the vulnerable. We saw continued growth in services for children and young people, and I talked earlier about the growth in crisis lines and 24/7 help. There were lots of other innovations as well, particularly support to the acute sector, really proudly stepping forward across mental health services. And again, I know this trust did, to really improve physical health skills, to be able to look after the physical health and well-being of our patients well during that period. Now, we mustn't kid ourselves either. We know that many of our patients felt isolated. They couldn't go out as they normally might or come to groups as they normally would. Carers, sometimes we know, felt very, very lonely and sometimes concerned. And so we heard that whilst we did a good job, actually there were some things that we really need to pay attention to this winter. So as we look forward about what did we learn and what do we need to focus on in the coming months, I would say the following. So firstly, I've talked about the long-term plan and the agenda for growth and expansion. We must be resolutely focused on employing more people, seeing more patients, particularly younger people, people in our talking therapist services, providing really excellent 24/7 crisis services and growing our community mental health team. We need to maintain as far as possible as much face-to-face activity as we can, whilst always also really pushing the boundaries on all of that digital therapy and contact as well. We need to carry on being focused on the physical healthcare needs of our patients, flu jabs, annual health checks, really, really making sure that people are staying physically well. We need to stay focused on carers. We need to do all of that in the context of understanding our diverse communities and promoting equality. We know that COVID hit some communities more than others, whether that was our BAME communities or those who were lonely, isolated, disenfranchised, maybe didn't have access to a computer or a private room to talk to people from. So we have to be really, really careful to be sighted on our local communities and ensuring that we support them through the next difficult few months. We know Camden and Islington is a massively diverse patch. You have some terrific experience of reaching out. Your work with the homeless included as a great example. So we need to fast track our improvements, be resolutely focused on recruiting staff and growing services and being accessible. And I would say that in order to offer really good care during this next difficult period, the myriad of relationships and partnerships you have with voluntary sector services, your user groups, your carer groups, and of course your staff groups are going to be absolutely pivotal, as well as relationships into the ICS with the acute trust primary care and our hugely important local authority colleagues. So being great at partnership is going to be essential to getting us all through the next period. I have to end, I think, with staff colleagues, our workforce, whether it's those colleagues who are working at Camden and Islington and stepped forward so beautifully in Wave 1 and are working hard now, thank you to you, or whether it's colleagues working right across health and social care. Please look after your mental health. Please be looking at practical strategies for getting through what's not just a marathon, it's an ultra marathon. We have to ensure that we're here for the long haul and that we say thank you to each other often. So I would like to conclude by saying thank you for what you've done, thank you for what you are going to do, and please stay relentlessly focused on expansion and reaching out to people in the way that Camden and Islington has always done.
Thanks very much to Claire Murdoch. It was particularly pleasing to hear Camden and Islington reference for the outstanding work that we do. And apologies if people were having difficulty with the video there at the beginning. It was a bit slow. It worked perfectly, of course, in rehearsals, but when you always come to the live event, there's often a problem. And there was a few issues with the sound quality, but I think we got the gist of Claire's message, and I'm really pleased that she took the time to share her thoughts with us. It was very good. So let's now move to the formal part of the meeting. Let me introduce myself. I'm Jackie Smith. I'm Chair of the Board and Chair of the Board of Governors. Absolutely delighted to be here. And the minutes from last year's annual members meeting are on the membership page of the Trust website. These were approved by the board on the 5th of December 2019 and by the Council of Governors on the 10th of December 2019. And during the reporting year, there were changes to the governors and to our board. And I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed to our work throughout the last year and who's left us now. We're very grateful for all the work that you've done. So we didn't have any governor elections this year, but Iris Dern, our Recovery College manager, joined the council as a staff governor in December, taking over from Charlene Hales, who left the trust. We also welcomed appointed governor Maureen Brewster from Voluntary Action Camden, who replaced Kevin Noonan. And during the year, we were keen to expand our board and appoint new non-executive directors, and are absolutely delighted with the appointments that we've made. Anu Singh is our Senior Independent Director and also a board member at the Whittington. Thrilled to have Anu on our board. And Marcel Moncrief, who will be joining us as a non-executive director in January, but is already taking part in board meetings and committee meetings. Really delighted. And then a first for Camden and Islington, we have two new associate non-executive directors, Claude Williams and Danny Sandhu. I'm really pleased that they will be taking part tomorrow in their first board meeting. So I'm delighted to welcome them, and I'm sure you'll wish them all the very best in what's going to be a very interesting time. And of course, my role changed this year. I did join CNI as a non-executive director, and then I was appointed as the chair of the board of directors and the Council of Governors in February of this year, when Leisha Fullick ended her term of office. So that was just, of course, before the pandemic took hold, and I've never actually had a board meeting with everyone in the same room. So it's been an interesting and challenging year. But in the past few months, our staff have been truly amazing, and I've witnessed that. I've heard that in webinars are absolutely outstanding, and I am full of praise for our staff who've worked tirelessly for our service users and supported each other in these challenging times. It's been a privilege to work alongside the Trust, and I want to thank everyone, staff, volunteers, carers, and all our partners for their work. I'm now going to hand over to our Chief Executive, Angela McNab, who will present our annual report and achievements this year.
Thank you, Jackie, and hello, everybody. Well, I'm sure that you'll agree that none of us could have predicted what a turbulent time we'd be living through when we got together this time last year. Our annual members meeting, of course, is held to reflect on the year up to March. And at that point this year, the COVID-19 pandemic was just beginning to really take hold, wasn't it? But its impact has been so enormous that I felt compelled to mention it right up front. And I particularly want to say how proud I am of everyone at the Trust and how grateful I am to all of our staff and all our partners for their work and really their dedication to our service users during these really challenging times. Staff and service users are, of course, amongst the thousands who lost their lives to COVID-19, and our thoughts are with their families, and we remember them all the time as we continue to battle this virus, doing our utmost to keep everyone as safe as we possibly can. As the virus took hold, we did adapt really quickly. We introduced new ways of working, as Jackie has said, right through to our board meetings. We had new technology and systems that enabled us to deliver the very best mental health care possible. And I'm confident that we'll be stronger and actually more agile and more resilient as recovery continues. Now, our Director of Nursing and Quality, Dean Howells, is going to say a bit more later about our response to COVID-19. So I'm going to leave that subject there, and I'm going to briefly reflect on some of the other key achievements that we've made this year. So in January, a real milestone, we retained our good rating from the CQC, and their report highlighted many areas of outstanding practice, including that patients are treated with compassion and kindness across all areas, and there's positive engagement with service users, carers and staff. And we offer outstanding care supported by a flourishing quality improvement programme. The well-led review also found that we had strong leadership with robust governance and assurance processes in place. So that was really pleasing. Our QI programme, as identified by that CQC inspection, has really gone from strength to strength, and it's put service users right at the heart of what we do, whilst also having that key focus on improving the well-being and safety of our staff. Co-production is a key element, working with service users to shape their care, enhancing patient experience and staff satisfaction. And in 2019 to 20, there were more than 110 QI coached projects. That's an enormous number when you think of the time and energy that takes on top of all the other work that people are doing. 29 of that 110 have been successfully completed, with specific work streams addressing staff well-being, length of stay, managing violence and aggression on our inpatient wards. Now, as you can tell, there's too many success stories for me to go through them all one by one, but I do want to mention just one example to give you a flavour of the sort of things that come out of these fantastic projects. So on Coral Ward, which is pictured on the slide, QI techniques were used to introduce initiatives including safety huddles. As a result of this programme, there's been an 83% reduction in physical violence, and verbal aggression is down by 64%. With that greater stability on the ward, staff have been able to really increase the number of nurse-led activities, which we know makes such a difference to people. Moving on to some of the other achievements, we've recognised, as I'm sure many of you know, for several years now, that to really advance patient care and our working environment, we do need to improve our buildings. So this year, our estate transformation programme has really continued at some pace. We've had our plans approved for our new hospital build at Highgate, and many of you would have been involved in the planning and the designing and the thinking about that. And we've also now got to the stage where we have appointed contractors in place, and building work will be starting within the next few weeks. We've worked also with our staff and service users on designs for new integrated community mental health centres, and the one that you can see pictured on this slide is Lowther Road. And the plans for the very large redevelopment of the site at St Pancras are continuing. A very long-standing ambition was finally realised this year when we opened our place of safety at Highgate, meaning that those who are detained under Section 36 of the Mental Health Act are now able to be seen in this purpose-built, fantastic, calm, therapeutic, really lovely of a busy emergency department, which we really hear all the time has been unsatisfactory. It was great to have the NHS England Chief Nurse for London, Martin McRae, open that building in January, and we could see for ourselves the impact it was going to have, and he spoke passionately about what an important facility it is for the region. Now, infrastructure, of course, is about more than just buildings, and in March we launched our digital strategy, aiming to use the latest technology to make patient care safer and to really support more joined up and more seamless working. Within days of publication, the government announced lockdown, so our IT team had to step up and bring forward many of those plans that they'd put in place, supplying hundreds of laptops and other devices to enable people to work from home, doing consultations and meetings by video where appropriate. Wards were also supplied with iPads so that patients could speak to loved ones when we stopped the face-to-face visits for a while. We also introduced Windows 10 with Office 365, which has lots of features to make agile working easier. And we've enhanced Wi-Fi coverage across our sites, really supporting service user activities, which I know meant a lot to a number of people. And on top of that, we've made security upgrades to protect the trust against cyber attacks. We've also been working really hard to make improvements at the trust that are perhaps a bit less quantifiable and more about changing the way that we behave with one another. We want to ensure that equality, diversity and inclusion run through every aspect of what we do, and that we nurture and support the talents of all of our workforce. We've introduced a mentoring scheme and recruited equality champions who now sit on interview panels to ensure fairness to all candidates. In recent months, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement has shone an absolute light on the continuing inequalities that exist within society. And we have put a number of measures in place to support our BME staff and to develop their careers, including ensuring that there's a risk assessment regularly updated to support their health and their well-being. It's really hard to convey how grateful we are to our staff for everything that they do. We're constantly striving to ensure that they feel supported and appreciated and protected. We want to bring about a cultural change that makes C&I kinder, safer and fairer, where everyone is confident that there's nowhere else they'd rather work. And I'm now going to hand over to Dean Howells, our Director of Nursing and Quality.
Thank you, Angela. And hello, everyone. Firstly, please can I start by saying a huge thank you to all our staff and frontline teams during the unprecedented COVID pandemic we've been experiencing. All our teams really continue to support our service users during these very challenging times, and of course are really supporting each other as well. The teamwork over the last 8 months has been just absolutely incredible. Myself, the exec team, the whole board, we're extremely proud that we've put safety continually in front of all our decision making, and certainly the well-being of our service users and colleagues are at the front of our minds when we have had to be making decisions that are potentially very challenging. Obviously, you will be aware that during March we had to make decisions to change how we were running our services pretty much overnight. And whilst I can't list everything that we had to complete in those early days of the Wave 1 pandemic, I would just like to provide some of the highlights of what the teams did in a very short space of time. We clearly felt that we had to restructure how we were providing care at CNI, and this required us to restructure our ward areas. We had to create safe space for service users that may also be diagnosed with COVID-19. And we certainly recognised the need to change emergency provision into services. And we were very successful in setting up our mental health crisis assessment service in the Bloomsbury building on our St Pancras Hospital site. And this happened just within 7 days, which is pretty much unheard of. So the teamwork on show was incredible. And we opened that service and provided 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care after that first week. I think this is an incredible achievement. And as Claire Murdoch mentioned, this also really helped our partners across the patch, and certainly our partners in the acute hospital arena. This ensured that service users that needed emergency mental health input were able to receive it directly with us in CNI and not have to be diverted through A&E, which also helped A&E services that were under huge pressure during the early days of the pandemic and still are in Wave 2. It's true to say, Angela's touched on this, our community teams transformed how they provided their frontline services and their consultation services with service users. And this required a huge development around our IT and really ensuring that we continue to provide support for those service users that needed it. Moving on to the quality of our services, again, Claire Murdoch mentioned very much so that partnership working is essential. So we had to work in really, really close partnership with other organisations, again across the patch, to ensure that service users who were shielding received food and support during the pandemic. And to keep staff and service users safe at all times, we had significant challenges like the rest of the NHS on initially ensuring that PPE was available across all our services. And we really made sure that that took place. We were also absolutely committed to ensuring that we were able to maintain video meetings for all our staff so that they could work from home where possible. And as Angela said as well, that is something that will stick with us moving forward. And this agile working, I think, will be a permanent legacy of the pandemic. I think for me, the focus on well-being for our service users, but also our staff, has been incredible and really stand out. And I think the support that frontline staff and all our teams have had has been really, really high quality, and certainly staff being able to raise issues has been really important for us. And this is both staff that have physical needs and psychological needs, and for us to ensure that we continue to value and support staff and service users at all times. For those not working from home and coming into our sites, we've had to review all our buildings and all our clinical areas and how we work within those spaces. So our estates teams and the frontline teams have had to work really closely in introducing social distancing, and of course the obligatory mask wearing that we all do, not just whilst we're at work in key areas, but whilst we're traveling and in our personal lives. So I think quickly running through the list of what we've achieved sounds really easy when you play it back, but genuinely it's been a huge challenge for us organisationally, and I've been absolutely amazed at how everyone in the organisation and the trust has just continued to go the extra mile day in, day out, and has stepped up to the challenge time and time again, and I'm hugely, hugely grateful. Moving on to CQC, Angela covered the initial part of our CQC inspection, but as colleagues will be aware, the pandemic came very shortly after we received our report. But what was really, really good to see in the CQC report was some very clear highlights of where we'd really continue to improve our services. And thinking through the establishment of our primary care mental health networks, CQC said our joined up approach to primary care and in that space was really excellent. Again, our partnership working with stakeholders across London, not just North London, was really acknowledged. And certainly our strategy at that stage for staff health and well-being improvement and positive engagement with service users and carers was seen as a real standout deliverable. So we should be really proud of that. Of course, the CQC also are required to point out where there are challenges in organisations or where improvements are required. And certainly 3 areas around high demand for our acute services, large community caseloads, and sometimes delay to mental health act assessments were really clearly put forward as an area for the trust to concentrate on. And I can absolutely say to the AGM that these areas have been relentlessly focused on both pre-wave 1 and during the pandemic to ensure that we can continue to provide the services that people need. Clearly, we still have more work to complete on our flow in and out of services, and that's very much a focus for us right now as we're right in the middle of wave 2 of the pandemic. Alongside that, part of my responsibility is to ensure that we learn really well from serious incidents, and our quality improvement methodology, which Angela's mentioned, and our quality and safety committee has been instrumental in ensuring that we're a learning organisation and we do learn from incidents and also complaints. Moving ahead, on meeting our priorities, we really are focused on ensuring that we reduce any waits for Mental Health Act assessments, and we've had a whole project team devoted to that. Certainly we have seen improvements come through since we set up the action plan, and this is also absolutely included in partnership in a co-produced way service users and indeed their carers. And as a board and as a trust, we also get feedback on the quality of our services via the friends and family test, but I have to say that's not enough. So I was very fortunate to be able to commission a review of our current service user and carer involvement and experience work. We've got some great work taking place, but I think there was a time, the time was right actually to bring that together. So the executive team and the board will be receiving a full report commissioned by Leeds Brookes University in December, and then that will inform in partnership how we move forward with our work in partnership with service users and carers. And then finally from me, from the point of view of action planning, and safety, I was fortunate again to launch a safety amnesty when I joined the organisation, and certainly that was the start, I think, of people being really, really encouraged to kind of talk about safety concerns that they had in their teams. So that's something we will continue doing, and we will have another safety amnesty in the new year. And I think that's a really good opportunity for staff to bring forward any concerns. We've moved significantly on our Safety First campaign, and also David, who's our Deputy Director of Nursing, has been leading the charge on our suicide prevention strategy, which will be launched in the new year. And I think that's a vital strategy in support of our clinical strategy, which was adopted by the organisation earlier this year. So I'd like to end by again saying a huge thank you to all our teams. It's been an absolute privilege to work alongside you during this unprecedented time in this country, but in the world as a whole. And I'd like to hand over to David Ragg, who's our Director of Finance, who will discuss our financial performance during the last year. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, I'm just going to spend a short time going through the financial position of the Trust last financial year, 1920, and that's the first column of numbers in that table, and it's the second column is just a comparison with the previous year. We reported a deficit of £2.1 million, which is the accounting deficit of the organisation, and that's the number at the bottom of the accounts. It actually contained an impairment of fixed assets, which is basically where we look at an independent valuer looks at the value of our assets, and if they change, and ours have, they changed downwards, they charge that to the accounts in the year it happens. That's a non-cash technical adjustment. So in reality, what that means is the number we were reporting, if you take that 3.9 million out of the position, was a £1.8 million surplus, which was better than was expected by our regulators, and because they were expecting break even. So that's an important number for them, and an important number for us, I think, is what's the underlying position of the Trust. Now, our regulators £1.7 million in funding last year to support getting to break even. But actually, that was £1.8 million more than we needed. If you take that away, that full 2.7 million, we're showing an underlying deficit of 900,000, which is actually a really good position for us. Our regulators expected us to be showing a 2.7 million deficit before the injection of that funding, and for us to show a 900,000 deficit, it was really good performance for the year and ahead of our trajectory for getting back to recurring break even as a Trust. So we're really pleased with that. Can we have the next slide, please? What this shows is where we get our income from, and 70% of our income, you can see in the big blue chunk of the diagram, is from the NHS. The next biggest is 14% from education, training and research, and 8% from local authorities. In 1920, we had a big increase in income of about 12 million, 10 of that coming from CCGs to cover inflation and investments. Including that money from CCGs, there was 4.4 million for increased employer pension contributions. CCGs were given more money to pass to us as Trust, to pass to the pension fund, monies that had previously been paid by the Department of Health and Social Care. So that's, it's not really an income increase to us. It's just an accounting transaction. We also saw our income from support funding drop a little, from 4 million to 2.7 million. So the actual income increase in real terms is nothing like as much as it appears to be. The best way to understand that is to look at what we spent our money on. So if we move on to the next slide, expenditure, you can see the biggest share of our expenditure by miles is on paid costs. That's the sort of amber coloured thing. 71% of our spend is on paid costs, and then about 10% on supplies and establishment expenses. The expenditure actually increased by 8.3 million between the 2 years, of which 4.4 was the pension increase I've already mentioned, and 4% was on pay awards and costs of pay drift, and it also paid for a 1% increase in staff numbers. So We were basically able to put all of our increased income into staff resources, and our non-paid costs didn't increase at all. So, and in a sense, that's a good outcome as well. Keeping control of the costs of our estate, costs of our procurement, being able to invest those resources in the staff. Next slide, please. Our cash balances rose by the end of the year to 52 million. That's obviously a continuation of a strong position we've had previously, where we've made surpluses and we've sold assets so as to build up some capital sums to invest in the new hospital and the community hubs project that's been talked about earlier. The capital spend was broadly in line with the plan. We spent about 9.2 million on capital, on building, fixtures, fittings, a lot on IT, and a significant amount on the St Pancras transformation programme. We were expecting to dispose of Stacey Street and Holloway Road last year. We didn't do that, really, as much as anything because of COVID. We hung on to Holloway Road to assist us with the decant around the new hospital project, but we've held on to Stacey Street, and we're working with the local authority to come up with a joint project there to support homeless people, which we expect to be able to do this year. And that was really in direct response to COVID, so that we weren't selling an asset that the local authority and other users might potentially need. So we can move on to the next slide again, please. And of course, at the end of the year, we were hit by COVID. It had an impact on us from really the end of February, late 1920. And we spent money on the rapid creation of a mental health crisis assessment service. We had to cover for staff sickness. We had to spend some money on personal protective equipment. We had to do a lot more cleaning to cope with the infection control, and we had to provide IT and stuff to enable staff to work from home. So we recovered from NHSI about 250,000 for that last month of the year to cover COVID costs. And as we've gone into this year, actually, those numbers have risen quite considerably to, at the highest point, something like 700,000 a month, which has been reimbursed to us by the DHSC. A final slide now, I think. If we can move on to that, please. Yeah, the audit. The audit was done by Grant Thornton, who scrutinised and signed off our accounts. All the audit was done remotely. There was a change in timetable because of COVID-19. We submitted our accounts to NHS Improvement on the 7th of May, in line with national deadlines, and Grant Thornton, or our external auditors, reported to the Audit and Risk Committee on the 15th of May, and the accounts were submitted on deadline on the 25th of June. There was one significant finding by the auditors, which they're basically saying, because of the impact of COVID, that resulted in a material uncertainty over the valuation of land and buildings. And that's been applied to every NHS trust they've audited. We used an independent value to assess the value of those buildings to do the accounts, but there is an uncertainty now about what they're worth. And subject to that reservation, a full unqualified audit certificate was given. So thank you, Carl. I think I'll pass back now to Jackie before Wendy comes on.
So I think we are now going to have a video recording from our lead governor, Professor Wendy Savage.
Good evening and welcome. The governors have had a busy year despite the changes caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We welcomed 11 new governors after a successful election who started their term of office at the last annual members meeting on the 3rd of October 2019. A small elected group have just finished work on governance. In December 2019, we appointed a new chair, Jackie Smith, to take over from Leisha Fullick, who retired in February after an innovative and successful 6.5 years. Among other business, we confirmed several items of expenditure relating to the St Pancras development project acquiring land from the Whittington and leasing land to Moorfields. We approved the appointment of the development partners, and we extended the contract of our auditors for a further year. NHS England wished us to have a chair in common with Barnet, Enfield and Haringey, with whom the Trust has formed a strategic alliance sharing some services. After considerable thought and discussion, the governors did not see how this would benefit our service users and declined the offer. The direction from NHS London in March 2020 that all non-essential meetings should be cancelled meant the May Council of Governors meeting was postponed to July, and the regular group meetings were suspended. However, the frequency of governors' open meetings was increased, and there has been regular communication between the chair and the governors. The projects funded by the grant the governors received from the Trust continued, with the choir meeting regularly every Tuesday and holding a successful concert in the unit headquarters with NHS choirs on World Mental Health Day in May 2019. Since March, the choir has been meeting virtually. The other project started this year was a dance class, Dance for Joy, which also met in the hall at St Pancras Hospital. Sadly, one of our longest-standing service user governors, Roger Searle, died in July after a long illness. As a retired architect, he took a great interest in the St Pancras project and contributed many ideas. I attended the virtual memorial service in August and learned more about his artistic life, which was impressive. The outlook for the coming year is uncertain, but we hope that C&I will continue to manage well despite the pandemic and maintain its good record of caring for our service users and our staff. Thank you for your time. Thanks to everyone for their work for our Trust, and my best wishes to you all.
Thank you very much indeed, Wendy, and thank you to all our governors who've worked really hard this year. As Wendy said, it's been an unusual, unique year and not easy, but I'm really grateful to Wendy and all the governors for what they've done. Can I also say on behalf of the Trust how sad we were at the death of Roger Searle, and I would like to say thank you for all that he did, his energy, his drive and his commitment to Camden and Islington. He will be very much missed. So we now have time for questions, and in fact we've had quite a lot of questions, so I'd like to bring my co-presenters back, if I may, and bearing in mind the number of questions that we've had, I'm going to urge my presenters to be brief. Not something they're used to, but you need to be brief because I want to try and get through as many of these questions as I can. And we did have a comment at the beginning from Anu saying it was really nice to hear Claire Murdoch referencing some of the work that we do in the communities, and I agree, that's really good. So Dave, if you are still there, please, someone has asked, how is the £9.2 million broken down? Are you able to give a short answer to that
Yes,
question?
I am. Yes, I am. It's 4.4 million pensions increase, 4 million pay award and pay drift, and $1 million in terms of growing the workforce, which is the about a 1% increase of staff. I think it was 23 whole-time equivalents for the year. So that's how it's broken down.
And Dave, if I can stick with you too on this next question, please. Someone has said, if the deficit is smaller than we expected, could we not have spent more on staffing?
I suppose the answer to that is yes, we could have done, because the deficit could have been small, could have been larger, and we could still have hit our target. But actually, one of our not so long range targets is to get back into recurring balance, and the quicker you do that, the better you do that. And if you make a larger surplus than expected, you are able to retain the cash, which we can use for investment purposes around new buildings and new plant and equipment.
Thank you. Dean, I'm going to come to you with this question, if I may, please. Some service users are saying that access to the Highgate Hospital site is really poor. No parking for disabled drivers and a steep hill for those with mobility issues.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, I think that's really important feedback for us. Obviously, over the last 6 months, we've been working really hard to ensure that access is as safe as possible for people. So I think, Jackie, can I take that outside and perhaps connect up with the person that's raised that and get some more of the detail? But certainly as we're in wave 2, we want to ensure that we have safe access, safe environment, and we do want people to access when they require it. So let me take a personal action on that.
Yeah, thank you. If you could, Dean, because the obviously the feedback we receive from our service users and carers is terribly important. There's been
Absolutely.
some comments on the feed about communications as well, whether it's phone or email, and it's frustrating to some of our service users and carers. So we've not lost sight of those comments in the Q&A function. We will pick them up and we will get back to you. Thank you for sharing your frustration with us. Wendy Savage, thank you for your comment in the box. This is not a question, but on behalf of the governors, I'd like to echo the thanks to all our staff who've worked so hard. Thank you for that. Dave, the question here is, can we see the valuations of the buildings?
Well, you can see the list of the buildings and you can see the total valuation of the buildings in the accounts, but we don't release individual valuations in case we get into commercial negotiations about buying and selling buildings. So no, we wouldn't release at that level of the detail, but we can tell you the whole value of the estate, and we can tell you what list of buildings we've got.
Thank you for that, Dave. And then Angela, if I may bring you in, because there's a couple of questions on the St Pancras development site. And one of the questions here is, what clinical services will you still be delivering on the St Pancras site in 5 years' time, or post-development, whichever is the later?
Gosh, but that's quite a detailed question. I'm not going to be able to give a complete answer to that. I'm also unable to predict 5 years in advance. But what I can say is that quite a lot of work has gone into the design of the community centres that we're building, as well as the Highgate new acute build and the building that we expect to leave at St Pancras. And we've asked people's views about what needs to go where. So a kind of overarching rule of thumb would be that some of the more specialist services, such as the traumatic stress service or the veteran service, are expected to stay at the St Pancras site, whilst some of the more community-based services will likely go out into those community hubs that we're developing. But obviously, as we get a bit closer to the master plan for the St Pancras site, we'll be coming out and bothering you all again for further input and support as we design and plan exactly where different services go and how they're best accessed. So nothing is absolutely fixed yet, and we want people to be completely co-designing and co-producing that with us.
And Angela, one of the questions here is there going to be any more community integrated centres or just 2?
Yeah, it's a bit too early probably to answer that. I think we know that we're going to have 2. We've got 2 that we're developing. We hope to have a third in a very different part of Camden, where we know that there's quite a need. But that is going to be a little bit further out in time, because we've got to identify obviously a location and go through all the business case bureaucracy and planning that's required. But I think largely in the much longer term, this will depend on the outcomes and the feedback that we get from those first 2. So really a big innovative change, an opportunity for us to show that we can make that integration that's sort of focused on a local place really work. And if what we find out of that is that is a much more effective way of supporting our local service users, then of course, why wouldn't we start strategically to plan for more?
And then the final question on buildings, if I may, Angela. When will the Bloomsbury building be lost to the Moorfields development?
Oh gosh, well, not very quickly is I think all I can say. We'll be spending at least the next year and effectively a bit longer than that, working on a planning application for the St Pancras site. Following that, then of course, we have to wait and get the results of that through the planning process. And then gradually the building hopefully will start to emerge on the site. So certainly not for another year and well beyond.
Thank you for that, Angela. Turning to a different theme, if I may, and this is coming up in some of the comments and some of the questions. It's about the use of digital services to see service users and have consultations that way. Someone has said, when will we see clinicians face to face again?
Well, the kind of the immediate answer, and Dean might want to say something about this, is that we have to be guided by the infection control rules and the need at the moment to still keep everybody safe. So I don't know exactly when the vaccine will be fully implemented and will have moved beyond a really high risk from the pandemic, and when we'll start to get those increased sort of freedoms coming back into our lives. But I think what's more important to say is that we are still seeing some people face to face. So where that is the appropriate thing to do, where somebody, for example, according to the acuteness of their need, or because of the circumstances where they live, or the way that they can or can't access services through a device, through digital support, where those things come together so that the right thing to do to support somebody is to see them face to face, I want to absolutely guarantee you that that is happening. And if that's what somebody says that they need, then we make the appropriate safe arrangements using PPE, the right sized rooms, all of the things you'd expect us to take into account to make sure that we can deliver a service safely. But if the question is about when are we going to be offering that more routinely, I think that is some way away and heavily dependent on the effectiveness of the rollout of a vaccine. And then probably the final thing for me is I think some people have found a real benefit in being able to receive services through a virtual mode. And I suspect that there'll be some people who will want to continue working in that way beyond the absolute kind of need to. And we'll be wanting to build that into the way that we offer choices in our services.
Thank you, Angela. And if I can just pick up on a question that came in overnight, it's quite an important question, this. It's been established that 38% of elderly patients in hospital have COVID-19. Has any such statistics been collated for psychiatric patients?
I'm certainly not aware of anything nationally, and I don't have the national figures to hand. What I can tell you locally is that in the first wave at the beginning of the year, just under 10% of our service users who were in an inpatient facility tested positive, and about a quarter of that 10% were older, were over 65 years of age. Now, in this second wave, the levels are much, much lower, so it's about 0.3%. And what we, of course, are doing is continuing with that very stringent infection control, absolutely using those new ways of working that we've talked about, so avoiding any increased risk wherever we can, including increasing the more effective ways of testing, using something that's called lateral flow testing, a new, much more rapid way of testing more frequently. So very hopeful that we'll be able to keep those levels very low by keeping to that very stringent infection control regime.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and rattle through a few more, if you will bear with me. So Addy, one of our public governors, has said, Angela mentioned the introduction of equality champions on recruitment panels. It would be great to understand what difference this has made to recruitment and how we will evaluate and build on the success. Are there any early findings, Angela?
I don't have the data to hand, and I'm very happy to look that up and see if we can put something on the website when we've finished this meeting. But certainly the very early figures that I looked at did seem to be showing that where we had equality champions sitting on a panel, there was a greater likelihood of somebody from a BAME background being a successful candidate than when there wasn't. So I think we did see that there was some early impact. I think that we should get to a position where we're not just having a single champion on a panel, but where we've just got a much more diverse panel, so we can be really confident that what's happening when we're making those interview selections, it is an absolutely fair process.
Thank you, Angela. Now, this next question, I'm sorry, Angela, I'm going to stick with you on this one. This is quite an interesting question. You may like it, you may not. It says, well done on the CQC rating of good. It's a strong score. How realistic is it to get an outstanding rating, and is that within the Trust's reach? If it is, what would be the key thing that gets us there?
Gosh, what a great question. I think it is a great question. Absolutely, it is within our reach. And of course, that is our aspiration. And as you will know, in some areas, we did achieve outstanding ratings in certain elements of the Trust. So we haven't got that far to go to get to that absolute consistency. So I think two big things for me. Dean is really the one that should be commenting on this, but I would say really having that focus on the safe domain. So absolutely getting more consistency in terms of the very, very best practice in terms of safety. And it's that word consistent. You know, we're fantastic in lots of parts. We're very good in other parts. We need to get everybody up to being at that top level.
That's great, thank you. And a comment here from Valerie, one of our governors, who says, thanking the CEO and chair and all the staff for their amazing work at CNI to continue to seek improvements. And I love the new Neds. I'm pleased you do, Valerie. Keep up the great work. We continue to grow and improve. Thank you very much indeed for those comments. And Bev has put, can you bring back a PALS service, please? Dean, is this for you?
Yeah, sure. I certainly from the point of our existing response on PALS, we will be able to rethink about how we expand that. But what I would say, I think there's another related question that I touched on around how we continue to improve how we receive feedback from service users and carers. And I think, Jackie, you know, the fact that we'll have that co-produced strategy will unlock that issue for us as an organisation. And if colleagues have just 2 minutes at some stage over the next couple of weeks, just log on to Care Opinion nationally and you see the vehicle that we will be able to use in the new year in proper partnership, so people can post how they feel about the service and raise questions in a similar way to how people are raising questions now, and we'll get a pretty immediate response. So I think that's the future on, you know, how quickly we can respond to issues that are being raised.
Thank you for that, Dean. Dave, I've got one for you. Which buildings are you planning to sell off?
At the moment, we've only got one plan, which is Stacey Street, where we're working with the local authority to try and either sell to them or to have a leased arrangement to create a building for homeless people. That's the only one in our plan at the moment, apart from St Pancras, of course, as part of the overall development.
I'm glad you added that last bit, Dave. Yes. Dean, this is an interesting comment from someone who said complaints feedback, when will it be simplified service, allowing for service users to have access to this? It's interesting because we were, of course, yesterday at the Quality and Safety Committee discussing complaints and the importance of not just responding to them, but to understand the themes and what we can learn from them.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. I think what I'm hinting at in my previous answer is, as well as the formal complaints approach, which is kind of set out nationally, we need to be much quicker on how we respond to people's concerns before it gets to a formal complaint stage, even though, you know, we will always respond to formal complaints. So I think there needs to be a liver conversation if people are having concerns. And we're doing that with staff around concerns that they're having in the team. So we should be applying exactly the same approach to service users and carers to make the conversation live. And I genuinely think Care Opinion, and I have worked with Care Opinion previously, offers that solution actually.
Thank you for that, Dean. That's very helpful. So this one is for you, Dave or Angela, and there are comments about IT systems. So I really want to pick up on this question. When will the Trust invest in an IT system that joins all the multidisciplinary teams' involvement in mental health services?
As soon as we possibly can. I don't think it's just about investment. I think it is that there's quite a lot of work to be done to make an interoperable system. I'm sure people are frustrated by this. I'm frustrated by this because I think we've been working towards this for a very, very long while, and I absolutely can see what a difference it would make, particularly between social care, social services and our own systems. I can't give you an absolute date. I think we can probably give a more detailed update in the response that we put on the website, but it is definitely something that across the system we are working on. It's not just, of course, about Camden Islington working on it. We need to work on it with those important partners.
Thank you, Angela. And a comment here, which I think is a nice comment to read out to Jeff and all the team, really. Good to hear the recognition for the digital team and the efforts to get the workforce geared up for remote working. A great achievement in a short space of time. I couldn't agree more. Obviously, there are frustrations around IT and Wi-Fi and things that do and don't work when we want them to, but the team have done a phenomenal job in a short period of time, and I'd like to say my thanks to them. So a couple more, and then I think we will draw a close. Sorry, I'm losing my thread. I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't go up and down. Apologies. It was going so well. Which services closed to referrals during this year for any period? I don't think any services.
I don't recall any closing to referral. We will check that, but I don't have any recollection of needing to close a service to referral.
That's correct, Angela. We didn't close to referrals.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. As I say, there are comments here about how service users communicate with us and what's the preferred route for communication, which we do need to pick up on. We're not going to ignore them. So the final question, someone said, how long are the waiting lists for each service? I imagine that's quite a long and complex answer to give. For example, how long from referral to treatment for the psychodynamic therapies?
I don't have the detailed bi-week information for each service. I think we know that there are some services which do have longer waiting lists, so let's be clear, but they are a relatively small number. So services, for example, the specialist personality disorder service, the ADHD assessment service, some of those services we are all the time talking to our commissioners about those issues. But it is a relatively small number. It is something that is absolutely noted in board reports. And what we can do is we can highlight that small number of services when we do the response on the website.
Thank you very much. So there are other questions here that we've not quite got to. There were many more questions than we expected, so that's fantastic to see. It's great to see that people are engaged, interested in our work, and posing questions that aren't just positive comments, but challenges to us too, because that's what matters. We want to hear the feedback, we want to improve, and whoever posted the question about getting an outstanding rating, that's how you get an outstanding rating. You respond to the concerns that people raise and you improve. So that's it, folks. Thank you very much. It's the end of this event. Let's hope this time next year we'll be able to see each other in person, because I don't know about you, I am tired of Teams. And it would be so good to get together and really genuinely appreciate what we do in one room. But I just want to say, finally, my thanks to all the staff. They truly are phenomenal, and they have done one fantastic job this year. My heart goes out to them for work that they do and the determination and commitment that they show day in and day out. So thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you next year.